I can also tell you that something that I think is the most controversial take is that I believe that solo researchers will do the best in the bull. It's not gonna be teams; it's gonna be solo. Simply because
Interesting.
teams are too hard to scale and they're too hard to work. So I really believe in the 10,000x engineer, uh, even in the bull,
Right.
especially in the bull.
So do you think because solo researchers essentially, if you hire, let's say, four individual solo researchers, you're getting better bang for your money than you're hiring like a team of four?
Yeah, moreover, the main problem that most researchers have is a visibility problem. And so you can argue that the reason why you will join some other firm or team is to basically get that promotion. But there's always two sides to that. One side is yes, you will get more engagements because you're being, your brand is being offered. But the other side is you're not getting engagements because you suck. So just get good. And what happens when you get good is that if you get shorthanded in any way, as in, are you getting the spear bit per week pay and you're an LSR and you're being offered anything less, you're just gonna leave instantly. So it's really hard to scale that when everybody's absolutely, a psychopath, right? Everybody's like, bro, this is what I want, give me that or fuck off. So it's really hard to make that work when people have options like, blast contest, leading a contest, everybody's fighting. And so the only concern that you want to keep in mind is whether having all of these contests is good or bad for the projects. Because I believe it is worse for the projects compared to last year, where last year it was obvious that you do a code arena contest, you get all of the attention, you're super safe, and it's great. Well, today you have seven different running contests. Let's say, all the top people, like, and I can name them, out of respect, Trust has its own firm, Watchbag has its own firm. You got Ladboy, but Ladboy maybe also has its own firm. Ronnie from Offside Labs probably has its own firm. You have your own thing going on. Django, who knows if he's gonna come back. Maybe I'm gonna be there, but maybe I'm not. Zach maybe he's gonna be there, maybe he's not. Who are you left with? You're left with the people that either couldn't get to a firm or couldn't get to the new level or didn't want to. And so the chances of always having, these top tier researchers becomes a bit lower. And so that's where the firm becomes more a guarantee. But what tends to happen over time is that if, let's say, even yourself, let's say you try and do two audits in a row or two audits in parallel, what are the odds of you missing something? And the answer is there. The odds increase as the more code bases you check, and so it's a fundamental issue for projects, not necessarily for researchers. Because as a researcher, anytime you get paid less, you'll just change and do whatever pays you more, which in the bull is going to be bug bounties, obviously. Like, what do you think? Like, it's obvious it's going to be bug bounties, saving real money when everybody's hyped. And but the opposite side is that for projects it becomes more difficult to choose, and so it becomes more important to be in tune with what's going on and really, evaluate what you're getting in terms of contests and in terms of other initiatives.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what kind of part of the cycle we are at any given moment because it's been a very dynamic change since the start of, let's say, 2022 to now. It's clear that the pace of innovation and new players in the industry is increasing a lot faster, and the options are branching out in many different ways. So for contests, like you said, now it feels like contests are really spread out. So it's hard from a project perspective to kind of get in at the right time, and especially, let's say you have booked your contest in for a month in advance, and then the blast contest comes, and now no one's gonna have a look at your account, right? And then you can
Rest
argue
in
about
peace. Yeah,
the game theory about you should look at the other like things that people wouldn't expect to be looking at and blah blah. But when push comes to shove, people are gonna go where the money is. The big
yeah.
amounts
I
are
love.
gonna attract.
I really love talking about the game theory of choosing the contest and figuring everything out. But I think what I like to teach as a for office hours that I do in general, or even to my students, is that you should evaluate critically your results and what happened, but you should also be confident in the fact that if you get better, you're going to get better results. And not even because it's true, because the reality is for many edge cases, like the top people on, let's say, on Immunify, as far as I understand, the number one is basically either like a firm or it's basically set up to look incredibly good. But many of those people, they are basically a one-off scenario where you make you hit the jackpot once, and then you do whatever else career and you just re-roll to a different name or whatever. And there's nothing wrong with it. But what I'm saying is, objectively speaking, you want to just ask yourself this question is, will you hit the jackpot if you try many times, or will you hit the jackpot if you only try once? And so if you agree with me that you just try more, then you can have this philosophy where the better you get, the more likely you are. And then at the same time, you don't want to draw on in work, because you want to leave that space to try something new. And so the blast contest is the perfect example of a big problem for platforms and a great advantage for solo researchers, because if I'm not scheduled, fuck it, I'm just going to try it, right? And so having that flexibility, especially as more opportunities come, becomes more important than ever, because you don't want to put a cap to your results by simply guaranteeing an engagement, which is what a audit is. I'm gonna be there for X weeks, and you're gonna give me Y money, and that's basically a lock-in of that value. So if you look at it from that perspective, then it's really hard to lock something in if you're extremely bullish about what can happen in the future.
Yeah, that's a perspective I didn't consider before, and it's really cool actually. And I think it applies especially to bug bounty hunters, because they're the ones that are going to have that flexibility. And I agree that in the following years, things are going to get more and more ridiculous. We're going to see more and more ridiculous contests. And it might be every once in a blue moon, but I think the frequency is going to increase. So maybe instead of having once a year a ridiculous $1 million contest, we might start seeing them twice, three times, four times a year. And if you're a bug bounty hunter, you have the flexibility to switch up at any time, and that doesn't take away from your earnings just because of the nature of bug bounty hunting. Because you can come, like whatever you're doing, you can just come back to it right after the big contest. So
Yeah,
I think if you're good enough, if you're that level that bug bounties can become a main source of income, then that's definitely the most financially rewarding place to be in the next few years, I believe. If you're not at that level that you can live off bug hunting, or you just don't like coping with the uncertainty of income, which I you could argue that is a skill issue as well. I reckon that contests are probably still going to be the best bet, especially now that everything's so spread out and you don't have that concentration that all the OG researchers, all the heavy hitters are going to show up and going to get everyone's money. Now everything is spread out, so the beginners have a large chance again.
yeah. And I think the biggest consideration there is really a personal one. It's really whether you find the enjoyment in winning, as in, do you want to be first as many times as possible, and do you hate losing, or do you want to have either a major impact, or do you want to have like a let's call it a newsworthy impact? I think for a newsworthy impact, what I will do and what I'm considering especially is to have like specific projects that you basically shadow babysit. They don't even know you exist. That doesn't matter. What matters is you learn about the project, you follow it, and then you prepare to prevent something. And so that's one scenario. And then obviously that scenario can also evolve in a more collaborative scenario where you basically just send them your lows, your mediums, and then you create a relationship. I think that's how you can launch your own company. You know, even if there was a million different firms, like just pick one project you like that you know has sufficient money and sufficient interest. Just send them your findings, and over time you'll build a relation that is based on value. So it's a good way to start. The second level will be to just grind contests. I feel like there's something just awesome about the idea of being like, okay, whatever. I'm not gonna look at the money as much. I'm not gonna try and maximize it to the cent. But I know the EV is good in contests, so I'm gonna just grind contests forever. I'm gonna decline every request for audit or whatever. Every time I get a request for audit, I'll charge them four times the average. I don't care. I'm just going to do the contests and just see what happens. I think there's something great there because you eliminate a lot of the uncertainty. And the uncertainty, like based on your personality, the uncertainty can be worse than choosing anything. For many people, like you read all of this stuff, and I talk about this because I see it in myself as well. Like like what I try to do for myself is I try to find whatever is going to get me to just focus on the action and on building something. And so I ask myself that often. It's like, what if I just drop everything and I just do contests? I'm like, fuck it. That would help me focus on getting better, because you can argue about the money, but you cannot argue about the skill. You get objectively better if you just grind contests all the time. And I think it's because you get more resourceful, where the best researcher is able to find more stuff with less energy. And so I try to think about that versus the money, which will be more about selecting the opportunity better. I find that, if I know that it takes me 20 hours to find something interesting, then 5 hours, even 10 hours become a normal time investment just in deciding what to do next. And so, and the funny thing I would say is that this is the same process that happens for like C-suite jobs, where I don't know if you ever read about, these top jobs, but like you don't like, it's not like you have a 100 offer every week for really good jobs. It takes even 6 months or even years to find the new CEO of Apple, the new CEO of Amazon. It takes years. And so you want to look at some of these bug bounty opportunities in the same way, where you are going to commit a lot of effort. So you may as well also take the time to really decide, because taking the time to decide actually has a positive result later. And so it's really, that's what is counterintuitive, is that your brain tells you, I'm not printing now, so I need to find another button, find me a button to print money. But the reality is, just be confident in the fact that the button is there, and that you're gonna also have a better impact if you take your time.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of nuance nowadays and a lot of ways you can play this game. For example, if you are one of the guys that's in a team or in a company, you can easily have a babysit a bounty that you're looking at. You can easily just do what you suggested and just have the project that you're always looking at. And all it takes for them to make one mistake and you're gonna catch it. Like let's say you build a private testing suite for them. Ideally you would share with them, but let's say you really want that heavy bounty, you could keep that suit to yourself, and the moment they upload something that breaks some invariants, boom. And that could take 2 months, that could take a year, and you don't have to stop yourself in one project. You can keep, let's say you build out this invariant test suite for one project, you can go down to another one, and you're just spreading the chances of you hitting the jackpot, basically.
Yeah,
And going back to the,
yeah, that ties into what I'm trying to do with Recon, which is something we'll talk in a moment. But that my idea is really to learn how to have some automated set of tooling that does the job for me, because I believe that the vast majority of real exploits was preventable 100%. Like, I'm very confident in that, and I think that a solo engineer could have prevented that, given sufficient understanding of every stack and given sufficient preparation. And so that's what I want us to get to a point, is where we eliminate every low hanging fruit from the chain, simply because we have a way to find them. And I think I have the theory that it is economical to basically test everybody's code. And so we'll see where it goes. We'll see how it goes. I have spoken to many people that think it's too difficult, but I think we, like, somebody in some way has to just prevent more exploits. And I think it comes from really trying dumb stuff, basically. That's really what I see a lot, is like, we all test for the normal stuff, we all test for the logical case, we all ask what the project was developed for, but very few people have any form of setup to have some sort of a black box testing, where you're like, okay, can I just poke it, can I break it, what happens if I try this, what happens if I try that. And so I think there just is a level of complexity that a brain cannot handle, and that's where we want to have machine aided tooling. And that's where I think you want to expand as a solo researcher, because when I say solo researcher, I don't mean somebody just reads the code. I simply mean somebody that doesn't have the overhead of a company. And so those two things are not the same thing. You can be solo and still be extremely productive in this space because of the automation and because the openness of it.
yeah, I think it's no secret that our tooling right now in Web3 security is almost non-existent except for Foundry and Leader. And well, now we have other testing, we have Hummus and other ones like and all those things, but still, in comparison to what could be, it's very, very early days. So I think anything in that direction, it's gonna help tremendously. And I think it's gonna be the type of thing that this tool is gonna help you a little bit in a way, the other tool is gonna help you a little bit in this other way, and then at some point, these all are gonna come together, and we're gonna have this sort of framework that we can follow through with these tools that is going to completely eliminate any low hanging fruit. And so you're building Recon to try and address some of that. So can you tell us what it is and what's the purpose behind it? What are you trying to do? What's the vision?
Yeah. So Recon is basically a set of tools that me and Antonio are building that are meant to help people write invariant tests. And the goal that we have is that we can get you writing invariant tests within, let's say, if we can get you writing invariant tests within an hour, then we can get the majority of developers to use them. And then at the same time, if we can have a catalog of properties that help you find issues and help you extract value, then again we can get rid of most bugs. And then lastly, if we can help you run the fuzzer on the cloud, you don't need to set yourself up in any way. You just press a button and you have like 8 different fuzzers trying to steal money from real contracts. And so that's what we're building at Recon. We ultimately are a fuzzing shop where we would take a consulting engagement if you need to bootstrap your invariant test. But at the end of the day, our bigger vision is to build a tool that makes it so that anybody can start their invariant testing campaign and monitor it without any additional overhead. So if you want, I can show you the demo that we got.
Yeah, it sounds like you mentioned four different products in one. So yeah, I would love to see it.
Yeah, so I'm gonna show you what we want to release, and we'll do an announcement when the podcast is out. But do you see my screen?
Yes.
So basically, imagine having something like the Euler Vault Connector contract. So basically, you have a Foundry repo, and what we can do with Recon, and this is the demo, so we already compiled it, but is we would compile the contracts and extract the ABI. And basically, the way you set up a fuzz test is you need to set up some testing files, and then you need to set up some configuration file. And the way we basically do that automatically. So this is, if you've never done it, this is hard to show, but basically we just click a button. These are all of the functions that are going to be called by your scaffolded contracts. Then we have the possibility of tracking ghost variables, so basically view functions. And then we just go on the results page, and now we scaffolded all of the test files for your invariant testing campaign. And so all you're left with to do is to basically write your properties, which will be the tests that are meaningful in your invariant testing, but all of the scaffolding we have eliminated completely. Like instead of taking you an hour, 2 hours, we could argue with bigger code bases even a day to set yourself up. We made it so that it takes you, as you see, a few seconds of clicking and then a few minutes of making it run locally.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm trying to think different kinds of projects, how long that would take, and how. So, for example, that you're mostly using a code base that's well structured. Like how that would behave if I just had uh like a few contracts versus like a completely fleshed out folder system. How that software handle it basically? Would you have to like input the contracts individually, or does it just read your repository?
Yeah, so for any Foundry project, is supported out of the box. Like if it compiles in Foundry, we will compile it. And then what we did here for the demo is we eliminate all of the test extra files. But if you have a non-standard folder, you will be able to add whatever you need. So you will just list it out. And then from user feedback, we will change this from a button to like a folder repo. So if you need to
Take
find a
box.
specific file, you will yeah, you will do it that way. There are some bugs with the tooling, but some of the bugs we may not fix simply because it's just faster to fix them locally. Like an example would be this enum behavior. This one will fix, but fundamentally, this is already saving you all of the time to set this up. So we basically look at it from as a win from that point. And then the reason why I think Antonio is just a brilliant engineer, is that this setup that he came up with basically has you like it gives you like a clear place in which to add more handlers. It gives you a clear place in which to track your ghost variables. It gives you a clear place in which to basically just run it, and it already has the files to run, the Echidna file and the Medusa file. But most interestingly, is already compatible with Foundry for debugging. So if the code throws like an error, like initialization failed or reverted at constructor, instead of having to tear your hair out, trying to debug it, you can just run it on the Foundry test, and you basically figure out why it doesn't work, and it can save you a lot of time. And by the same token, once you do break a property through Medusa, you can just paste the list of function called, because the functions called are here, are these public handlers, right? All of these. then you can just paste them in your Foundry test file, and you can debug a broken property in literally 10 seconds, the time it takes for Foundry to run, versus having to check the logs, check the events, add more handlers, add more complicated tooling that you don't really need, because this is already set up for you in the best practice.
Okay, this looks like it's a demo, but it sounds like it's pretty fleshed out.
Yes, so I mean, we can
But
do. I mean, something we did is for simple code bases. The reality is that this is further fleshed out because, like, let's say we have this Yieldbox repo that I put that is public. Uh, since it's a Foundry, so again, I had to port it from Hardhat to Foundry. But then our app, as long as obviously we have the backend compiling it, but basically we are literally compatible with any Foundry repo. So our goal with this demo is to make it so that people can compile any Foundry project through the UI, and they basically get those handlers for themselves as long as the repository is open source. So in this case, I have this Yieldbox repo, and I ran the backend before joining the call, but the final version will basically have a list of all of your repositories and a way for you to trigger a job to add any new repository to Recon, as long as it's Foundry. And we're just going to compile it and upload the ABI. And since it's open source, we're going to share the ABIs for anybody. But that means that as long as you have an open source project, we will allow you to run all of this stuff for free in the Recon UI. And then in terms of the pro version, there's basically going to be options to run the actual campaigns, like actual jobs, like run Medusa if you do a PR, run Medusa if I commit, show me the broken Medusa logs, all of the stuff that is really boring and that big projects have to do. But when it comes to getting started with invariant testing, we think we made it as easy as clicking, three buttons and then downloading a folder.
yeah, that's fucking awesome. So like you mentioned you have a pro version, so I imagine this main functionality would be open to everyone that is open source. And then if you want the cloud option of running things automatically as you do PRs, then you do the pro. Is that correct?
Yeah, basically, we will do a pro version, a paid version for private repos and for automation to pay, for the engineering. And then this is also a way for us to offer a legendary version where we also offer consulting. So if you need the tooling and the automation, this is going to make it so that you click three buttons, you download a code, you put the code in your GitHub, and basically any PR you do will automatically run the fuzzer for you and tell you. And since we have this Foundry, I mean, this is the stuff I'm really excited about. But since we have this Foundry setup, we can take all of the logs for these runs and automatically generate a Foundry test, and over time even send you the logs of the Foundry test in your PR. So we can do all of these automations so that all of the bullshit is gone and you just get the good stuff. Um, uh, but at the same time, this scaffolding is mostly it's really flashy. It's going to get a lot of people to get started, but it's also not replacing an expert. Like, it's really interesting how people that are really experienced say that this is not particularly great because it doesn't save them the real time of having to think, the time of having to elaborate, the time of having to optimize. But people that have never used it, they think this is amazing because we lower the bar to nothing. There is no bar anymore. So I think this is
Yeah, I
going to
was gonna
be good for
mention
everybody.
that if you guys, I was gonna ask if you guys are planning to implement some sort of AI to maybe fine tune it to different code bases, and that could probably make it save you a little bit more time on specific things that you have to do for individual cases. But with asking this, it's kind of tricky as well because obviously the the pro the pro the programs that would benefit the most from this kind of thing would also be the ones that would be the harder for it to help, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
that's where it gets like that's where it's really interesting. We have like, first of all, this is not your like your end result of a professional handler, because most of the times you will want to clamp it, you will want to add some extra stuff. You could have hack doors, you could have flash loans, you would have asserts, and so this is really the flashy stuff to get people started. And then over time, we already know what a better version of this looks like. The problem that we're facing as engineers, and especially like for me, is how do we make it easy to have all of the extra features? Because for us to change this to generate, assert false or assert true, try catch it, or do calls where are they're all ABI encoded instead of using the normal call, so we can try catch all of the exceptions. That's really easy to do in terms of code, but it's really hard to explain to somebody at different levels how to use that. And so we are in the process of getting this to a place in which it works, and then we expect to have major improvements on the automation side, so that as we help more projects develop their workflow, and you can imagine that me and Antonio worked with Badger, so we had already had feedback on that workflow on real customers. But at the same time, as we get more feedback, we're going to improve that side. And then as we share this with the community and we have it open source, we're going to try and see how complicated can we make it before people start quitting. Because if we did the first version with all of the bells and whistles, people will quit the second one line doesn't compile. Whereas now there are a couple of lines, such as the enum declaration, that doesn't compile, but we can just put a warning like, you have to fix the imports for enums, and you'll be done. And it's still easy enough that most people are like, okay, I just have to spend 5 minutes instead of 2 hours, so I'm gonna do it. Versus having a scenario where you have so much more information, so much more complex code, and you don't know why it's that complex, and you basically end up not using the tool.
Yeah, I think it makes sense, and it's still pretty amazing that you just like you get all of that with clicking a button. So even though there's heaps of room for other things to be added to it, I think this is a great place to start.
Yeah, let me tell
I
you
don't know.
how we came to Recon. I think it could be like, first of all, I mean, why is it called Recon? Do you know what the tool from Spirit is called to basically to apply sec- uh, to security reviews? Like when you have to apply to a security review, you used to have to go on a tool called Gravemind, because somebody at Spearbit is also a Halo enjoyer. And so when I built Recon, I just went through all of the helmets from Halo, and there's the Hayabusa one, the Ninja one, that's the popular one. But I thought I'd pick something that made sense with reconnaissance, and so I just picked the Recon helmet. And then what happened was that and it's the reason why we're building this is, um, there was the elastic swap hack from a Coderina contest, and the elastic swap hack was actually a hack that happened because you could simply donate to the pool to break it. And so that was an example of people just not going out of the box to find an exploit. Then we have had the Euler hack, which in my opinion was another example of a lack of simply trying weird stuff. I don't see, like, if I told you in the docs, if you press this button, it doesn't check the solvency, everybody would have checked it for that idea. But the fact that it wasn't obvious at the time and it wasn't made apparent at the time, then made it so that nobody even checked, right? There was a bug bounty, they did a contest, they're like, the setup was there, but the result wasn't. Another one more recently would be the Kyber one, where there's a interesting thread on Twitter, a discussion between what I believe is the original fuzzer, the original engineer versus some other engineer that they basically have this argument. And the truth is nobody found the bug, so nobody can claim to you know they could have prevented it because they didn't, because there were $4 million on the line. So that's what I mean. But basically, the first version of Recon was like a prototype I built myself through Foundry, where I would use Foundry randomness to tell me which next function to call. And then at the end of the loop, I would just see if at the end of all these operations, my attacker had more value than they started with. And so when I show that around, people were confused as to why I wasn't using invariant testing. And so at the time I didn't know that was an option. And so then me and Antonio met in Paris, actually at DSS. And so we then did this engagement with Badger for the EBTC project. And so it was very clear that taking that same idea of having invariant tests and then having some sort of base property for value extraction can help you find real bugs. And so that's what my long-term goal with this is that if you're going to spend $1 million in doing audits, why are you not going to spend 20K a month on a fuzzer that runs forever, every second, and at least tries to do something? Because the fact that we don't have something like that doesn't make any sense to me. I think it's a very low hanging fruit, and it gives some chance of doing something before other people are doing. And I think that's how most hacker actually operate. They're definitely not more sophisticated actors in this sense. They don't have like a mathematical paper explaining how they steal the money. They just put the fuzzer, and the fuzzer does the work for them, and they just pay the AWS bill. And when sometimes they get the jackpot. So I think this is a better theory for exploits as of today. And so we should all, as a industry, start to have this type of tooling ourselves, and as a means to avoid again these low hanging fruits. Because if the fuzzer can find it, then the only rational question is, why are you not running the fuzzer? If the fuzzer can find it, just set yourself up for success, give yourself that chance by running the fuzzer, and see what happens. I think a few years ago we could say that most people didn't know how to set it up. It was slow, because Echidna is a really slow fuzzer. If you haven't never used it, it takes basically 2 days to get the coverage that you get in an hour with Medusa. But now you have Medusa, which is basically a peak security research achievement. It's an incredible tool, and it's completely open source. We can all build it together. And so all we did with Recon as of today is we made it easy to scaffold the Medusa campaign, and we're also making it easy to run it in the cloud, so you don't even need a laptop or whatever. You don't need to have the separate machine that runs for 2 weeks. You just press two buttons and you run it in the cloud. And so that's our hope, is that by making it that easy, everybody's going to start doing it, so that again we get rid of low hanging fruit exploits.
So how does the scaffolding work when you get through the repo? Can you run us through like the algo and what you guys have done in a very short
Yeah,
summary?
yeah, and I would also recommend inviting Antonio for the podcast to have more a technical discussion. But also, Antonio has explained this in different workshops, so I'm gonna keep it fairly brief. Fundamentally, we use inheritance to allow the usage of asserts that have a different implementation. So what that means is that you're going to write something like EQ or T or check EQ or assert EQ. And in writing that, you're not actually using the Foundry assert. You're using a different assert based on the underlying tool that you're going to run. So if you're running through Medusa or Echidna, that assert EQ gets translated to the HEVM dot whatever, the version from Medusa and Echidna. Whereas if you're running it for Foundry, it's actually doing the assert EQ that you're more familiar with. And so what we did there is we made it so that all of the inheritance is handled. Like you don't have to think about it. So now you have compatibility by default. And then once you have that, then the next question is, how do you kind of separate your workflow. Where do you put the constructor? Where do you put all of the stuff you call? Where do you put your properties? And the simple scaffold that we have today will have a file called target functions that will basically tell you all of the functions that are being called. You can place these target functions in any other file, but having a file that tells you where to put them makes it easy. And then the second file is going to be called properties, where you basically specify all of these properties. And lastly, we would have setup, where it's basically just the file in which to set up the constructor and set up your actors. And so once you agree with this architecture, which again is has some opinion, but is still fairly simple. We're just trying to separate those ideas and make it compatible with all other runners. Then the next step is to scaffold the actual contracts, as in actually generate them. And so the way we do that is by compiling or basically getting the ABI, and from the ABI we get all of the functions that would change the state and the functions that don't, and then we basically just pass them through a code generation process that effectively just gets all of the inputs, gets all of the targets, and then there's a lot more stuff that we don't have in the demo to keep it simple. But basically, you have different instances for different contracts, which means that you could have the Uni v3 version from Uniswap v3 and the Uni v3 version from Algebra, and you could give them a separate name or a separate label and run them through the same color, because the end goal is to make these type of fuzzing setups automated. And so but at the end of the day, we just take the ABI, all the data that is already available, and it's something that you will have to do manually, and we have a machine do it. So
Can
it's going to make
you
the same mistakes that a person can make.
can you use it for the command line as well, or right now you guys just have the GUI?
We don't have a command line as of now. I mean, technically we do, but we used it this way because it's just a bit easier for everybody. Because at least from my experience, most people don't want to use the command line. Like I don't know if it's a controversial thing, but there's people that really like the command line and they think, cast is the best, and then there's people that don't want to use cast, they don't want to read the docs, they just want to have a button, and you basically put a server that calls cast for them, and that's what they want. And so as of today, it's a better trade-off to put it on a separate UI, um, uh, especially
I
if you
I
consider the
disagree
interaction.
I disagree a little bit in the sense that only having it for a separate UI has a lot of friction for most researchers, because I believe most of us are using VS Code or whatever editor to go through the audit. And I think having that extra friction of like having to go through the UI and clicking around and stuff to get that and then copy and paste and putting into your code, that creates a point of friction that's unnecessary. I think having the option of having the command line could make things a lot smoother, because then you don't really leave your environment. You're just right there, pa 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 pa, boom, everything's like right where it needs to be. So in that sense, I think having a command line will make it even better. But I think for especially now that it's a new tool that people don't really know how it works, having the graphical user interface is like amazing, because you can actually see what the hell is going on and how you're supposed to use it. So for starters, I think it's better actually. I think if you show it to someone that's not used to uh, doing a lot of tests, just straight on the command line, it might seem a bit hard to wrap the head around. Which in this case, the GUI is really good. So that's my two
Yeah,
cents
the
on that.
main challenge I expect. Yeah, the main challenge you would have in a CLI environment is that what's happening with the green and red buttons is that you're basically toggling on and off a bunch of functions. So if you were to map out the same behavior on a CLI, your CLI command will be massive, right? You would have like skip this, skip this, skip this, skip this, add this, add this, add this, add this. And then if you add the permutations, because the reason why the UI is there is because I'm trying to solve the specific problem of you defining a ERC20 token and clicking a button and putting it as an input that you can see, like it glows like in a video game, it literally glows. And then the second you add it there, we secretly add donation handlers, and we secretly add more behavior that you don't even need to see. And the problem I'm really having with the CLI setup is that you can do anything on the CLI, but the second you add variations on the handlers on a per handler basis. So do you want the advanced one for this one? Do you want the simple one? Do you want the complex one for each one of them? And then I add this dynamic linking of this contract that I'm gonna deploy for you and add it as one of the parameters. I think literally your CLI command will be this big. And so maybe we would need to have a UI that generates the CLI command. And so I basically skipped the step in the middle.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah,
was gonna,
it makes sense.
yeah, I kind of see where it becomes a issue. Mm, Something maybe worth considering. It's kind of like you said, you could generate basically like a markdown file where you tick a box, you tick boxes, and you can read it and do the same functionality, which I think it's still, I think like it might look ugly for some people, but at least for me, it would seem a lot more seamless if I could just do it all from my editor. I'm that kind of person that just likes to keep keep things in the same environment.
I
Feel
think
like
I
it's
think
a
I've heard a couple of people say this. I don't think it's in the majority, but I definitely am not gonna dismiss this. I think it's a great point. Let's see what happens, in a week after we launch it, if it gets completely abandoned versus if it was a VS Code extension. I think I mean, there are challenges with the VS Code extension as well, but there's also some interesting stuff that could be done there as well. um, I think namely would be having, labels at the top of each function that will allow you to mutate from one version to the other. That would be really cool. And I think to do it on the web, it's more difficult because just you have to code more stuff. But we really have to see how complicated things get, because I guess my main assumption is, at the end of the day, if it saves you time, uh, it's still saving you time irrespective. Your assertion is that it would save you more time if it was there, to which I would argue that is true. For the default configuration, it will definitely, because we would have your Foundry repo, your out folder, so it's already compiled, so you will be able to compile it locally. So I think it's definitely more helpful there. But at the same time, it will lose on the more complex behavior, simply because it's more difficult to get that right without a UI.
yeah. And when you guys launch, is what state is it going to be? Is it going to be a beta stage? Are you guys going to have the pro version set up the gate?
Yeah, I think we should have the pro version and the free version both set up by the launch date, and basically we expect to be doing some testing now, as we before the podcast goes live. And then obviously this is a never-ending endeavor, because from, let's say, from a V0 to a version with multiple types of handlers, and then having custom handlers on each of them, and then having this dynamic linking, that's definitely a lot of work. But I think what we will do early is simply making sure that it works, and as long as it works, that's already success. And then to have, the version with the advanced handlers or the simplified handlers, that's a secondary concern, simply because the people that will need it are also the people that can kind of figure out themselves. So it's at this point, it's really a matter of getting more people to run invariant testing in the easiest way possible. And so that's kind of what we're optimizing for as of now.
And I think even for those projects that already have their testing set up, it could also be useful because it might make you realize you're missing something. You can probably do some sort of comparison between your testing suite and whatever Recon puts out and see if there's any discrepancy or something like a handler that you currently are not considering or something like that, and you could add some value in that way, even if you already have like a fully fleshed out invariant testing suite.
Yeah, that's what is rarely explained about invariant testing is that, like, I mean, the recon handlers are very wide. And so what that means is that, like, if you, for example, they don't set up a proof on a token, so they will always revert there, and so you still need to do some tinkering, and they're also not going to be clamped, so again they're going to have a high chance of doing stuff that doesn't matter. So what that means, it means that it takes longer for the fuzzer to find the paths that increase your coverage. They basically increase the lines that are reached in the code. And so, but theoretically speaking, if you had infinite time and infinite resources, you would always keep your handlers as generic as possible. So the art of fuzzing, and this is not just me, but this is like all the pro fuzzers that I talk to, the art is in striking a balance between having no bias, as in you don't skip stuff that matters, but at the same time, not wasting your cycles on 99.9% failure rate, which was the original version that I had on Foundry, didn't have any coverage guided. So it was actually 99.9% failure, as in 99.9% of all calls will revert at all times. And then that one basis point will work. Whereas with Medusa, once Medusa finds a path, it's going to keep that in mind in its corpus. And so that's why the pro side is so interesting to us, but also it's like not something you will do as a as a beginner. But the pro side, what we want to have is a way to reuse the corpus, so that you just spin up a new job and you don't have to rebuild it. And then the other thing you want to do with your runners is like, why do you this there's this idea that you should have one, or some people have this misconception that you should have only one target function, basically one contract that handles all of it. But the reality is you can use as many as you want. And so with something like Recon, you can just set up your, I'm going to test the price feed separately. I'm just going to set up my own boilerplate there. I'm going to set up the, I don't know, landing pool separately. I'm going to set up my contracts there. And then through the learnings you get in writing these separate handlers, then you can write a bigger one, because the problem with big handlers is that it takes forever to actually do these meaningful transitions, because you can just think about statistically, the more functions you have, the more unlikely it is to call a specific sequence, simply because you have more combinations. And so that's the beauty of having all of the setup, is that you can quickly bootstrap a new handler for a new section of your code, and then you just let that run as you start to build something more, something bigger. So an example could be a price feed. You just leave a handler that are super vague and you just let it run for a day, and in the meantime you're building the rest of the handlers, and then you take those lessons and you put the same lessons in the new one, and now you're creating a process that doesn't keep you stuck. And then your machine is not fuming gas because you're not burning the SSD by running it locally, running multiple workers and multiple handlers. And so again, it really is a matter of defining a workflow that it definitely works for us. We think it works for other people. And so it would help ultimately get to the end result faster, which is a high degree of properties being broken if they're broken, or a high degree of properties being maintained through high coverage if the properties are actually held in the code base.
You know, it's super interesting from a perspective that basically if you have enough time and resources, you're gonna catch everything. If you run the fuzzer for long enough, and that kind of it's a way of trying to get to formal verification without doing any formal verification away. So have you guys considered doing something similar for formal verification tools? Because I believe that would be even way more efficient, because instead of having to run the fuzzer, which requires a lot more computation, you could do kind of the same scaffolding, but for something like the Certora tool, the Certora prover, and possibly have faster results with less time of running. Is that something you guys consider? Something you guys have in mind?
Yeah, we definitely also were thinking about this. I mean, there's two problems with the Certora prover. There's really only two problems. One, it's as far as I know, it's private source, closed source, so it could change at any time, and we will basically be building on a, just building, just like building on Facebook for Zynga. And then the second one is that there are cases in which the solver basically runs out of memory, runs out of time, doesn't work, is not compatible. And so we are not experienced, or at least I can speak for myself, I'm not experienced enough to know what we could build and safely allow anybody to run. And again, if we build something that every time you try to run it, it just creates these errors that are undebuggable, then it's a really big problem. But that said, and again, Antonio's brilliancy comes back because the way he set up the Recon setup is through a open source repo he built called Chimera, and Chimera is compatible with Halmos out of the box. So that means that we should be able to support Halmos fairly rapidly once we see that there is interest there, and we also see that there's a way to make the workflow work for Medusa, Echidna, Foundry, and Halmos. So we definitely have that in the back of our minds, but at the same time, we simply think this is more of a achievable goal that can be achieved soon. And then, in terms of the question with formal verification, that's a basically there's like a technical answer as to why the fuzzer shouldn't do formal verification, and it's that it should basically try the dumb combination. So there is virtue in having a dumb fuzzer, but at the same time, there's a lot of time to be wasted in having a fuzzer that doesn't progress. And so my 2 cents are that there should probably be some sort of a exploratory strategy, we could call it, where Medusa could have a pass where it basically uses the same ideas as parameter, uses bound analysis to figure out what the bounds are, and then it builds some sort of a virtual corpus through it, and then it explores, and then it goes back to the fuzzing. So I think there is a world in which that's achievable. It's simply that, at least for me, it's a bit too far off for me to be able to directly contribute. But if the opportunity arises, that's what we will probably do. We will do something really basic, like, is Medusa stuck on coverage for more than 3 minutes? Check the stuff that is reverting the most, see if we can do some bound analysis and try, and basically have this phase between the fuzzer and bound analysis, which will help, which will make it so, because the end goal of Medusa, in my opinion, is that you use the recon handlers that are super generic and they just work. Whereas today, if you use those handlers, they work, but they take forever. And so you have to find some strategy to make them faster. And we mostly agree that the Medusa should do that instead of the developer. It should be at the fuzzing engine level.
Yeah, that's cool. I wonder if there's a way to fuzz the formal verification from Hamos in regards to what states are runnable before you run them, because Hamos you can't really run on execution flows that are above a certain size, but we don't know what that looks like. There's no kind of like formula. There's uh, no reading that you can do that can kind of output, okay, this is runnable for Hamos or whatever. And if we had something like this that could, point to, okay, this is runnable to Hamos, or if you do this modification, this can be runnable for Hamos. If you can have that kind of fuzzer and kind of change this, that can arrive at a state that's runnable, then that would make it a lot easier um, to integrate it in the other fuzzers as well, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's probably what we will try to do if we were to be compatible with Certora. will be that we would have to find many heuristics that allow you to make it work. A simple example from, because we did the Sertora stuff with Badger in 2021. We basically did one of the first races with Securium, with Sertora and Badger. And I think one of the limitation at the time was it wasn't able to handle loops, and so something you could build a automatic tool for will be to unwrap loops and inline them, basically, or convert them, because like in the world, loops can have 1,000, 10,000, an infinite amount of items, but in reality, especially in smart contracts, you typically have 1 to 5, and so you can always unroll them through constants, etc. And so that type of stuff can be definitely automated, but you also need to be very proficient with the tool. Like that's something that even Trail of Bits does from a philosophy perspective, is that the people that build the tools are the people that also use the tools. And so in the same way, we use Recon to bootstrap our own stuff. Like if I have to set something up, I'm going to use it. I built it so I can use it, to be quite honest. And so the feedback cycle is very different from something that instead you just think is going to work in a certain way. And so that's probably the best lesson out of I guess they used to say, go work at a startup. If you don't know what startup to start, just go work at a startup and see what the common issue is. And the same thing goes for the tooling. You're going to build tools for stuff that you have problems with. You're not going to build great tools for stuff that you have no idea for. And so Antonio has been doing this for a long time. I've been building, my own stuff for a while, especially when it comes to making it usable for people. And so that's really where the collaboration comes from, in doing something that neither of us could have done alone, but and that could benefit us, but it could also benefit everybody by trying it out.
And you also mentioned a tool that I'm not really familiar with called Pharaoh. So what is it?
Yeah, so Pharaoh is another tool. I'm gonna share my screen, I guess. Let me see. And but basically, in judging, and it's literally on a Vercel thing, because this is like the darling of Coderina judges. But basically, when you are working with a bot, maybe we can get the bot trace result here. Let's see. So, but to make a long story short, Pharaoh is a tool to judge markdown files. And let's see, we're going to have give some alpha to the bot tracers, I guess. So, blah, 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 automated finding are here. So, how do you judge a bot trace, basically? Or at least, how do I judge it? I built this tool, Pharaoh, with the scrape function, so that I can just drop the markdown file, and most markdown files have this table, right? You see the table here, so I'm just gonna select it and paste it, and then I'm gonna get this regular expression here for the headers, because I know that it's repeated for every one of them. And so it's just gonna apply it, and now it's gonna grab me this not cleaned up JSON, so I have all the headers from it. I also have and I copied it now. I can go on the score section, and the score section also applies a beautification. And so now I have all of the headers from the bot report here, and they're all ready to be marked, because the way judging a bot works is that you have to judge each item individually. And so we will go through the bot. And what I did here is I created basically a way to have shortcuts. So in this case, this will be a high severity, so you would just tap H. But what you can do through the shortcuts is, if you tab and you press 1, you get L. If you tab and you press 2, you get R. If you tab and you press 3, you get NC, etc. If you type 4, you get to do. And if you type R, you get -3 for penalties. And so what basically the tool allows you to do is, it allows you to judge at this speed, instead of having to copy, paste, go on a new line, etc. And once you're done, it's also going to calculate the score for you. So that way you can just copy the score and you can use it, or you can copy the result and you can give people feedback based on your judging. And so this is an example of doing something tens, if not hundreds of times manually, probably thousands of reports at this point. But once you do that so long that it hurts your hands, you're going to build a tool to avoid it. And as far as I know, many judges use this, and there's also a competing one by Wax someone. But ultimately, most judges will use a tool, because how else are you going to give feedback on 200 lines of findings?
Yeah, yeah. Judging is a really hard problem as well, and I've seen recently that Cantina has their new tool as well. I think it's called Clippy, which is their AI assistant. I was wondering if you have any insights on that as well.
I do not. I Like I say, I express skepticism with any AI tool, simply because if AI tool ever makes a mistake, now you basically have to find it and have to fix it. So those are my true sense on the problem of delegating judging to anybody. Is that, like, let's say I am the judge and I'm responsible to make sure that everything was done properly. If I make a mistake, there's many types of mistakes and we can talk about them, but at the end of the day, if we make a mistake because we relied on somebody else, like the pre-sorter, or because we relied on the sponsor, or we relied on a tool, then we basically create a flaw in the process. And so it's simply, at that point, I'm like, well, why do we have the judge in the first place? You should have, like, it would actually be more fair, paradoxically, if everything was judged by the AI, because now you have a consistent set of criteria being applied, versus having the inconsistency of, oh, this is automated, this is not automated, this is done in a favorable manner, this is done in an unfavorable manner, simply because of that, which is also a fundamental issue of backstage in general, or escalations, is that in general, escalating a finding and sending comments gives you a better advantage than saying nothing, because you will always say something when you're right, basically, versus when when you're wrong. And so it's really difficult to have a process that is correct. I think it's a bit easier to have a process that is consistent, and I don't think having a bot will give you a consistent process, but it could also save time on things that are very trivial. So I think there's an interesting parallel between Recon for pros and Clippy for pros. Is that all pros will be like, it doesn't save me time, I still have to read it. But everybody that starts will be like, oh wow, it saves you time because it deduped 50 times or whatever, it applied the label. So I don't see a major negative risk, but I don't necessarily see a paradigm shift, where there are ways to have paradigm shifts, but I don't necessarily think making judging faster is the paradigm shift.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's great for low level stuff, as in things that are glaringly obvious. It can get rid of a lot of clutter. So that's I'm all in for, and I think that has a lot of value, because otherwise you as a judge would have to go for it manually, and in that case, it where it matters, you still have to do the work. So that still doesn't help there.
Yeah.
But where it shouldn't matter, then it doesn't. Like, all these crap reports, bot generated or whatever. I mean, not the good bots, the bad ones. Then it does not steal any of your bandwidth anymore. And I think that's amazing.
I find it funny that years of development, and I love Coderino, by the way, but years of development, and I still think the Google spreadsheet for judging is the best form of judging by far. So I know what the perfect UI will look like, but I can assure you that it's thousands of hours of sacrifice to make it better than Google spreadsheet, because Google spreadsheet is shareable, easy to use, as a find function. You can sort. So you know what sorting does in Google spreadsheet, by the way? It means that if I use the same label, it automatically groups them. I don't have to group and generate a group and add it and then do, like, there's so much stuff that is so saves so much time there. And so I think it's really easy to get these easy wins, but it's really hard to make the meaningful wins. And so my prophetic statement about all judging competitions is that they all look like they're going to be better than Codarina, and they will all end up having the same problems because nobody has found a solution to the deeper issue of how do you handle hundreds of security researchers whose only job is to scam the judge. No offense. So I don't think there is a
Yeah,
magic word.
I think it's the classic problem of outsiders just, or not outsiders, but newcomers thinking, oh, why didn't you do this? And everything has already been considered, and the IRD just shows that it doesn't work. Because I think fundamentally you just need human brains. That's it. We Until we have AGI, it's probably not going to be a solvable problem, and by that time, it's not going to be a problem anyway.
AGI is gonna
Because
use Recon. So
exactly. But I wanted to poke your brain around the the new thing that's going around about beginners focusing on new ecosystems like Caro or Solana or whatever other chains. I wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
yeah, I think so. First of all, I am a pragmatist, but I'm also a person that likes to state conflicting views, and then the truth is going to be in the middle. So I think it says a lot that Shu Wuni, the guy that made 500K in the ZkSync contest, asserted, and maybe asserted incorrectly, but they asserted that they didn't even know the language before they started the contest. They did like a few days of brush up and then they just dive in. I think it's very interesting to consider that because let's take that at face value. Then that means that a bug is not some sort of a grammatical mistake, although there are bugs that are grammatical mistakes. An example is using try catch instead of call or something like that, or using delegate call instead of call. But many bugs are really a meta issue about the understanding of what the code does. And so I don't know how you get that except by finding more bugs. So the language, the process of finding the bugs, the process of understanding something, the process of uh, in some way making yourself take the steps, that's probably universal skill, and it's a lot closer to solving sudokus than actually software engineering. Whereas on the other end, obviously, a person is that has already done it, they're gonna be familiar with the common mistakes. They're gonna be familiar with the common practices. They're gonna be familiar with the architecture, and so there's probably a lot of value in learning something new simply because or using something new simply because you're going to be better. So the question that you should ask yourself is whether the new ecosystem will give you a better opportunity than the previous one. And so this is basically a follow-up to some other clip, that of me on YouTube, where it's like, you have to look back 9 months. And so if I'm like, bro, if we had, in September to October, we had the Solana boom, then it is rational to think that in a few months there's going to be a Solana boom again. So I will go and look at the funding of projects on Solana. I will look at the how are new projects raised. Like, do they do IDOs? Do they do LDOs? Do they do LBP? How does it even work? To see what you can do. I will then figure out the tooling because, as far as I know, the Solana tooling is actually more advanced because it's a direct copy of another architecture. I think there's like this great video called JIT. It's DEFCON 30, and it's basically JIT fuzzing the Solana compiler, and it talks about some of these techniques and tooling. And so can you use that? Because now, if you know that you can use external tooling, you don't need to wait for us to build your Recon. You already have, barp suite of Solana. So like that can be very advantageous. And so what I'm seeing though is that in every niche you basically have kind of the wave, and so you have to decide or determine whether you can ride the wave, whether you can make the wave, or whether it doesn't matter. And so you have to basically make that determination. And for people that are starting out, I think it makes a lot of sense to be, the king of Solana. Just like today, it makes a lot of sense to be, the ZkSync guy or the optimism guy. There is very few shops that are that specialized, and so you can see an opportunity in our side, but you can also see an opportunity on the Solana Cairo side. So I would suggest, if you're gonna go for it, I would suggest going hard, as in commit hard and do whatever it takes, as in be in every workshop, do every hackathon, build all of the content, etc. And then, but do keep in mind that you are playing, a higher risk game, especially when you are, so you just have to hedge it in some way. So I think it boils down to asking whether you want to be the big fish of the small pond, or the small fish in the big pond, and then what kind of a additional wave or additional advantage you have to 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 rise.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly what I have in mind as well. You just kind of have to balance out what kind of way, what kind of wave you're trying to ride. And I think a great way to mitigate it, it's probably thinking more long term and trying to go for the wave that you think is going to go on for the longest, and potentially become as big as whatever other pond there is. Like, let's say if Solana ever gets as big as Ethereum, then you that's something that you can keep riding. And if that doesn't get as big as you think it would, then you can, maybe, if you still want to minimize the amount of context switching, you can transition to a developing role or a consulting role. So these are also options that you would have if you choose to go really hard. And even if that ecosystem doesn't go as far as you assume it would be, you still have other options, and you don't have to context switch 100% and lose all the edge that you built. That's still going to stick with you, unless you really pick a loser. Let's say you pick an ecosystem that, let's say, Cosmos in, I don't know, a year just tanks down, right? Then that's
Yeah,
there's
I'm
nothing
gonna
really you
tell
can do.
you something really weird about this, and this is something that, maybe one day I'll just do it. I'll be like, "Fuck it, I don't care. I'm just gonna do it." But basically, I mean, there's some shady story about Ethereum Classic. So they're like the people that started it, basically are like, I don't know. There's something off there, or but also maybe just Ethereum people that like shit on them. But that's what I would consider doing. Is like, why don't you go on fucking Ethereum Classic and become the number one audit shop for Ethereum Classic? Because it's like, I know it sounds stupid, but it's like, bro, you buy a shit ton of Ethereum Classic at basically zero price, and then you just try it. Because the reality of these space with crypto in general, is something. There's this recent podcast by Olaf W. Carlson, the guy at Polychain, the founder. It talks about like we are all working for the coin. Like you think you are working for yourself, but the reality is that the coin, Ethereum, that was minted, gifted, given, etc., is making you work for it. And so you can work for any of these ecosystems as long as you understand that you can be extractor, as in you just ride the wave and you take the percentile marginal profit and you give zero fucks, or you're basically building it together. And so another example would be that, like, just go and check the people that organize DSS, right? DeFi Security Summit. One of them is Sertora. Sertora is the host. Sertora made the event, but who was the other the organizer was Electric Capital. Like, why would the VC host an event? Is because they believe that having a safer ecosystem is better for their bags. Like, it's the truth. And so it's really interesting how you really get to choose the mental complexity and the risk. And so my recommendation will be to have kind of a 80-20 or a 50-50 approach. As you care less, you can have a 50-50 approach where 50% of the things you do are safer and 50% are just moonshots. And but as you get started, like if you never did a contest, shut up and do a contest. If you do all of the contests on like Solana or whatever for a year, then okay, maybe you're like, okay, maybe I should expand, and vice versa. If you're doing them on Ethereum, then maybe you expand a bit. And so I think a more balanced approach is better for people that don't have resources, and then a more risky approach is better for people that have resources. Because once you have the resources, like the reality is you can do whatever you want. Like Elon Musk, what did he risk? $27 million from PayPal. He was like, whatever, I'm just gonna roll them. Like I'm just gonna roll my chance, take the 10% chance, and I'm gonna go for it. And that's the beauty of the world in reality. Like you can pick your shot. But if you're starting out, I would suggest a more 80-20 approach, or a 60-40, where you do something reliable, you get some gains, you get some money, and then you also risk it a bit. And as you have, a treasure chest of money, then obviously feel free. Like I would bet, people that hit big bounties are not in a rush to do the next one. They're gonna be calculated. They're gonna take their time, but they also know that eventually they have to do it, because you don't want to just stagnate. So I think it's if you don't have money and resources, you have to press the button. So be smart about it. Just press the button, do whatever it takes. And then once you have some resources, definitely feel free to pick your battles based on your ideals, or based on what you want to see in the world, because you can have an impact, but it's gonna take a lot from you. So make sure that you can uh, do it in a responsible way, because you can fail. I guess that's what I would conclude, is like, if I look at a project now, let's say I want to start something, I start something where even if I fail, it's useful. That's what I look to find. And you can't do that if if you're not afraid of failure, if you're not afraid of trying something hard. So uh,
Yeah,
definitely
I think
recommend.
that's a great way to kind of sum it up. Just don't do things that make you afraid of failure. If you're afraid of failing at a certain thing, then probably you shouldn't be doing it. Like, I mean, this is
Yeah, it
counterintuitive because
depends.
you shouldn't be afraid of failing in the first place. But if that is really
Yeah.
going to take a toll on you, like if you're, let's say, the financial risk you're taking on foregoing some of the certain opportunities is going to really cripple you, then you probably should wait longer until you're ready to take that risk.
Yeah, the way I teach it, I was teaching it this weekend, because I do, at this point, I teach to people like random. It's a bit random, but like the way I was telling it is was basically the following: you want to have like a freedom number, which is the idea of Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss is like, okay, figure out how much you're gonna spend, put that on paper. That's the number you need. Every other dollar doesn't matter. It's all mental illness. And so the way I would put it instead is that you want to have that number to survive, and that number you want to feel like you're going to drown if you don't have it. And so you should be in a state of heightened anxiety, basically, until you solve that, because it's a real problem. You have to solve it. But once you do, then basically the remainder of your time you can do whatever you want. And so my advice is to try and strike ideally a 1 to 3, where you spend 1/3 of your time to survive, and then the two other thirds are for thriving, or creating new opportunities. And if you find yourself in that scenario, you're going to have an incredible life, because you have so many opportunities. Whereas most of the people, as in like the majority of people on earth, they have to spend 80 to 99% of their time just to get that value. And so you should really appreciate that, but you should also keep in mind that if you find yourself in that position where you're always trading time for money, or you're just pressing the button for the next bounty and you're not thinking about it, then you really are stuck in a rat race, and you should do something to change it. Whereas if you're not pushing yourself at all, that's not going to work either. So I think 1 out of 3 is the ideal, and then obviously like 50-50, 80-20 is more realistic, because not everybody can switch jobs when they have a mortgage and children, etc. So you wanna be realistic there, but you definitely want to give yourself a chance. That's what I think is super important, is that if you know exactly what you're going to do, like let's say you're going to just work and just be paid and you're not going to try anything new, you will have 0% chance of something new happening. Whereas if you at least give yourself some chance by trying something, trying the Solana contest, now you have a chance. And so that's a lot better. And if that chance pays out, you make $1,000 or whatever, that could be an indicator that there's more opportunity there. And so that's how you build your self-esteem, and you also build your opportunity in the same way. So
Yeah, well put. I think that's very valuable advice. And I also wanted to touch on the ZkSync drama that I know you have some insight in. So, can you please let us know what happened?
yeah, okay. So, and obviously, there's two things that I have to talk about for the ZK Sync contest. And so I think I'm gonna basically do the drama. This is the drama section of the video, but the one is basically alleged cheating or actual cheating that has happened. And the other one is me banning Unforgiven from the contest because of what he did or what they did. So those are two things that I will address in this, but at the same time I'm not gonna, like, there's no findings in the public, so I can't really give you like a 100% explanation as of today. But when it comes to what happened with Helm or HE1M, is that we ultimately were able to determine through the KYC provider that the individual that owned the Helm account was either a person that worked at ZkSync, as in somebody that I would call the sponsor was actually the person with that handle. So you can see that it's not even a conflict of interest. It's literally impersonating somebody, pretending to be somebody you're not, or it was their wife. And so once I was shown the evidence and the proof of that, then I basically just went back to the chats and because the only last question was, did Helm knew about this? And the answer is obviously yes, because obviously if they're the same person or if they're their spouse, they obviously know. But the last thing to check was to verify that there was an actual interaction between Helm and the sponsor in the comments on the GitHub issues. And so once you have literally people pretending to be somebody else and talking to them, and there is no clear disclosure, then the code of conduct of Code was broken, because you are supposed to put this in written in the issues on Code. So you're supposed to disclose this. And the second thing is there is a actual risk of impersonation. Then there's really not much else that to be said there. Like if I was, Gallo das Ballo, and then I had another account called, Surgeon Pepper, and I give myself any, like, if I don't disqualify myself and I'm the sponsor, for Badger or something, like, what is that? What do you call that? You call that cheating? That, because that's what it is. So funny enough, I was very hurt by this. So I actually called my father and I asked him, because me and my father used to play squash, which is like basically tennis in a court. And I asked him, I'm like, what happens if a referee is the husband of the person playing? And he's like, you can't referee for your wife. It's cheating because there's a conflict of interest. You're gonna argue in their favor. And so, like, even if by metaphor you have this scenario, then I'm like, bro, I'm overthinking it. This is obvious cheating. This is what we have to do. Even though we all know that this warden has great skills, we all know they could have done an awesome job. I don't believe that what we found represents what happened, for example, on the optimism contest. There is a chance that Helm had insider information of the optimism contest, but there's also a chance that they're a great researcher. And so I will still award them the dark horse of 2023, but at the same time, you can't do this. And so I wouldn't recommend doing business with somebody like this that is gonna, the second you allegedly pay them unfairly to their own belief, they're just going to cheat for more money. That's just not something that can be accepted in any way. And so the last comment I want to make is a clarification on something I already explained, was that I was talking to this person, the sponsor, because I was talking about the findings. And so I sent them some sensitive stuff. And one day we found a bug that turned out to be correct, but that wasn't fully explained. And so the bug that was found had a specific impact, and the actual impact was more complicated. And we had to investigate. And through the investigation of me as a judge, figuring that out, I basically found that it was a more important impact. And so I sent them this information. And instead of them like, oh shit, let's go fix it, they were like, bro, can you raise the severity? Like imagine, telling the judge to raise the severity for you or for your wife. Like, what am I supposed to do? Like, that's just not unacceptable. It's worse. It's like you basically have zero respect for any of us. We all respect your skills. Like, just take whatever you would have taken anyway. And so that's really what happened is somebody found a way to cheat, or at least to get this unfair advantage. And everything else can be, you can allege it. We can allege that they had more information. We can allege that they may have even left bugs in the code or whatever. But the reality is, there were people that knew each other, and they had a vested interest to help each other, and they did that without any consideration for the organization nor the sponsor, who in this context would be ZkSync or Matter Labs, that was actually paying for everything and having goodwill with these people.
Do you think that has happened other times? Because I think in this instance specifically is a very high profile contest. So obviously things are going to be more dramatic. And if something like that would happen, it would be easier to to get whoever is doing this. But under a smaller contest, maybe they could get away with things like that. Do you think this could be happening quite often, but just go under the radar?
I think so. I think, and we had this discussion with the Supreme Court. So there's documents that talk about some of our ideas on conflict of interest and how it can be abused. But my true sense are this: I don't think anybody has had literally themselves or their wife there. I think somebody may have done it, but I think something more likely that I think we have to is that make part of the rules is that the previous auditor or a previous consultant or a previous bounty hunter had more information, and so they obviously had an unfair advantage. And I think these type of unfair advantages have to be made clear, but they should also be accepted. Because, and I speak as the sponsor, because to me Code Arena works, and obviously, every other project is probably had it even worse. So like when I criticize Code Arena, I start by the assumption that Code Arena, at least it's in public. This happens in public. We have discussions about it. Everybody else just hides the ball under the water. But the an example as me as the sponsor is that for Badger, let's say, we had multiple previous auditors, and the majority of them didn't come back. Like we've had Dimitri, HYH, Sturmy, Leastwood, um I guess I'm missing somebody, but basically we had all of these people. We had Watchbug, but like we had all of these people, and we are doing the final exercise for security. Like, don't you think that we want them to participate? That we want them to like they know the code. They may find something that we haven't thought about. We want to give them that chance, and so it makes a lot of sense to simply say that you were the previous auditor and be invited. And I think as a practice, what I would say for projects is to invite your previous auditors if you think it's helpful to you, or if you don't invite them, you should expect that they're not going to join. That's what's going to generally happen. But I think it's a really dangerous scenario, because if I have an idea about a bug and I spent more time thinking about it, and now I find your code and I'm basically prevented to helping, what am I going to do? I guess I'm just going to give it for free, which works until it doesn't. So I think it's a difficult scenario. I guess there is a chance that some people have done this in the past, but I think most of other times the type of unfair advantage is really just being the previous auditor or a consultant, that ran some checks. They know about a bug and they didn't tell, and then they send it in the contest. And so this is almost I mean, it really is a shitty thing to talk about. It really sucks. I really despise all of it. But I think it's just what tends to happen with some people. They, if they find a bug, some people will not tell you unless you give them money. And so having a bug bounty ensures that at least they're gonna tell you. So I don't think it has created something new. I think it just gave another opportunity for that type of character to emerge.
Yeah, I agree. I think in this space is just always going to be a type of problem that we're going to have. It's just the nature of financial incentives.
Exactly. Let's go back to Unforgiven. Like
Yeah,
the I had to make a very difficult decision with Unforgiven because I know they're a good researcher. Like I have no issue with them as a person. I don't know them. I have no idea. Like, but we simply cannot have people that abuse the rules or stretch the rules to such a degree that they basically create more work than they save. And so, what I did with Unforgiven, and I have like a, I'm gonna eventually publish this gist where I basically tell him to fuck off. But basically, the simple explanation is that from a purely from the same psychopathic logic that is being applied by a person that sends us tens, if not, let's say 60 plus reports, and that's a very low accuracy, like they basically created more work than they are saving. And so my rational explanation is that if you create more work than what you're preventing, then we have to punish you because you're not helping anybody. You're just abusing the rules. And so if I'm the type of person that will not scrap your findings and will go through, that doesn't mean anything because the majority of people, the majority of judges, the majority of resources that I show them all of those findings would have agreed with me that he was clearly trying to, round up, using roundup as a means to get all of these free findings. And so what I did is I asked myself, is this what peak performance looks like? And the answer is no. Fuck no. Shawuni, 80+% accuracy rate, few findings, all important. Chainlight sends one finding, saves a shit ton of money. Hero doesn't even complain. That's what peak performance looks like. It doesn't look like sending a shit ton of stuff and then arguing it in post judging QA to gain an advantage. And so I had to make the decision: do I tell every other warden that they can send us shit and will tolerate it, or do I send a message that we will not accept people that are directly quote unquote stealing time and money from the organization because the contest rules don't clearly have an exact ratio of that? And so I just took a decision that made the most sense. There was no reason to to be like to include any of the findings in the report. So like, fuck it, I'm just gonna cut the plug and I'm just gonna punish this person for their behavior because I know that they did it on purpose. I know for a fact that if you're gonna send me things that can be downgraded, you're not going to send them as real problems. I know for a fact you're not going to argue with me for hours about something that you know is bullshit just because the reason why you're arguing is because you knew that if I make a mistake, it's tens of thousands, if not more of dollars. And so you show me clearly that you're a psychopath. And that's what the only thing I can do to an anonymous psychopath is give you zero money and make it public that you're going to get zero money because there's nothing I can do. I cannot shame you. I cannot punish you. I cannot ban you. We don't know who you are. So that's all I can do. And that's all we should do as all organizations. And so I'm going to end this topic by saying that no organization that allow this type of behavior because they're desperate, because whatever, we're gonna be next year, there's gonna be 20 more orgs that do contests or whatever, and then in 2 years there's gonna be like four or five, and it's all the people that do not allow this type of behavior. Because if you allow somebody to drive you insane just because you have to be nice to everybody, you're not gonna have any fucking product. We're gonna be left with people like this ruling the organization and the corpses of projects that get exploited right after because we let the psychopaths run the show. And so that's me not accepting that. I don't accept that. That's what I had to do.
I totally agree with the Unforgiven situation, particularly because I've seen him benefit multiple times from complete bullshit findings in a few different instances. like benefit by a lot. Just not like, oh, he got like, I don't know, a few. I've seen contests where he got like number one or number two with findings that were invalid. And I think he saw that his strategy was really good. That if you overwhelm them, it increases the likelihood they're going to make a mistake, and by the time they make a decision, there's so much going on in the business they can't walk it back. So if you can play that game in that way, where you can basically flood them with enough things that leaving you enough doubt that some of your things are going to be valid and some things might be not, they might just give you the benefit of the doubt more often than not when they shouldn't, and you can just keep playing the game.
Yeah, that's why you have this dichotomy in bug bounties, because we as judges we basically protect the sponsor from some of this experience, but in bug bounties you don't really have that many well polished triage services. Most triage you have to do it yourself, and so it's really this dichotomy between the critical finding that you have to fix right now and the hundreds of times where you still have to drop everything you're doing. You have to go check a alleged critical, and then you have to tell them to fuck off in polite words. And my colleagues have sent tips to a lot of people because they're like, maybe it's going to help us. And but over time, it really is. It's just these weird things. So I think overall, that the fact that the strategy works is a problem, and so that's probably the biggest problem with this type of systems or this type of contest, is that it really works. And so as long as it works, people are going to do it. And so it's just difficult to discriminate between a honest individual trying their best and falling short, and so you're like, okay, maybe we should give them some help, versus somebody that does it systemically. And so the unfortunate reality is that we have to be dicks to everybody, because some people will abuse our generosity. And that's the reality. One day there's going to be a fee to publish your report. One day there's going to be slashing penalties. You're going to be banned. You're going to have to be KYC'd, because there are some people that have received the benefit of the doubt and they've abused it. And since those people have created more work and more requests to allow the other people, the rest of the system to work, there's nothing we can do, because you basically realize that it's a winning strategy to make us lose. And once you jeopardize the organization has to eject you and protect itself. There's nothing else that can be done. And so it's just this natural, almost law of thermodynamics, that when you have the what's it called, the example in business is like, you have you have to shift the tiles and you have insects in the tiles. When you as the business owner, you have to check the tiles, and when it's time to kill the insects, you kill the insects. And so that's really what how it has to go. I wish we didn't have to do it, I really do, but I don't see a world in which we have every warden that is highly intelligent, like yourself, like Milo Truck, myself, Trust, Lambda, and I can go on forever, of people that all send you 100 findings each because they know it works. Imagine if everybody that understands that they can actually did it. It would be a nightmare. It would literally be, it wouldn't be worth anything. So that's really my point, is that we will never go back from that decision, because I took the decision that I think can save this type of project like Code Arena. And I believe that any project that takes the opposite decision will fail inexorably, because you told the psychopaths that they ran the asylum. And so good luck with that.
Yeah, I agree. And to end on a good note, congratulations for winning your contest uh, after all this time. So, what are the future plans for Alex?
Yeah, thank you. And it has been a long time. I wanted to go full time security since June of last year, as in 2022. And then I was asked to stay a Badger and help them finish their EBTC product. And so because I was basically I grew up my skill there, I thought it was would have been a dick move to leave, and I was being treated well, so I helped them do that. But that was my plan all along, was to do security. And so the my goals for this year are really just two. One of them is to get the LSR promotion and basically be recognized as LSR. And then I guess I'll have a third, but the second one will be to have Recon so that we can fuzz everything on chain. And then my real goal is to prevent a real exploit this year. So that's my only goal. That is a real goal. The other two I think will achieve whether I want it or not. But I want to prevent a real exploit so that I know that I've done something that has impact instead of some random thing. So that's what I'm gonna be optimizing for, is being on the chain and preventing real issues, because that's what I wanna do this year.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming by. As always, a lot of alpha coming from you, and excited to see you saving on-chain money for reals.
Thank you for having me, Hake, and I look forward to having you on our weekly Warden podcast if it ever pops off, and maybe we'll talk about your strategies to make a bang.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks, man.
Thank you, man.